Picture this. It's 1939, and the world is teetering on the edge of chaos. Europe is already knee-deep in World War II, and the United States is still pretending it can avoid the mess. Then, out of nowhere, physicists come along, waving their fancy degrees and talking about atoms like they're planning to invite them over for dinner. But instead of making friends with atoms, these brainiacs are figuring out how to split them wide open. And spoiler alert, it's not a good time for the atoms. Enter the Manhattan Project. No, it wasn't an urban renewal scheme to spruce up downtown New York despite the name. It was the ultra-secret, high-stakes race to create the most destructive weapon the world had ever seen. In August 1939, two physicists, Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, were freaking out because they figured out the Germans might be on the brink of building an atomic bomb. Enter Albert Einstein, who was probably the most famous physicist at the time. Szilard convinced Einstein to sign a letter addressed to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning him about the potential of nuclear weapons. Now, if you thought Roosevelt responded with lightning speed, well, you'd be wrong. It wasn't until 1941, after the US entered the war following Pearl Harbor, that things kicked into high gear. Better late than never, right? The Manhattan Project was like the Avengers of science, except instead of superpowers, everyone had chalkboards and questionable social skills. At the helm was a no-nonsense Army engineer, General Leslie Groves. Groves had the charisma of a bulldozer and was exactly the kind of guy you'd want to manage a project that involved government secrecy and potentially world-ending science experiments. Next up, you had Julius Robert Oppenheimer, a theoretical physicist with the look of someone who hadn't slept since 1937. He was the project's scientific director, often referred to as the father of the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer was brilliant, complex, and constantly wrestling with the moral implications of the bomb. You know, classic tortured genius vibes. The supporting cast included scientists like Enrico Fermi, who had already figured out how to make a nuclear chain reaction, Niels Bohr, who came with his own Danish pastry and theoretical insights, and Richard Feynman, who added some much-needed humor and chaos to the whole operation. You know, the kind of guy who'd crack jokes while figuring out the secrets of nuclear fission. The project wasn't some simple backyard science fair experiment, though. By 1942, it had expanded across multiple sites in the US, from Los Alamos, New Mexico, to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Thousands of people worked in these facilities, most of whom didn't even know what they were building. Imagine being told, just refine this uranium. It's for a top-secret government thing. Don't ask questions. Los Alamos was the nerve center of the whole shebang. It's where Oppenheimer and his team of scientists slaved away, scribbling down equations that looked like a toddler went wild with chalk, all in the hopes of solving one crucial question. How do you create a controlled chain reaction without, accidentally blowing up the planet? After years of failed experiments, late nights, and probably a few existential crises, the answer came in two forms: Little Boy and Fat Man. These weren't just nicknames for the neighborhood kids. They were the two bombs that would go down in history. By July 16, 1945, it was showtime. The scientists gathered in the New Mexico desert to test the bomb for the first time. It was called the Trinity Test, and let's just say, it didn't disappoint. The explosion lit up the sky like 1,000 suns. As the shockwave rippled through the desert, Oppenheimer famously quoted from Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Just a few weeks later, in August 1945, the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world was stunned. Tens of thousands of people were killed, and Japan quickly surrendered, bringing an end to World War II. But the debate about the morality of using the bomb would linger for decades. Oppenheimer, the brilliant mind behind the bomb, was left haunted by what they had created. Meanwhile, General Groves probably celebrated by chomping on a cigar and telling everyone, "I told you it would work." The Manhattan Project may have ended the war, but it also opened a can of radioactive worms. It ushered in the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and the constant threat of mutually assured destruction. All thanks to a few physicists, a lot of uranium, and some questionable decision-making. So, the next time someone tells you science is boring, just remind them that once upon a time, a group of nerds literally blew a hole in the desert and changed the course of history. If you think splitting atoms was explosive, wait until you hit that subscribe button. Don't worry, I promise no moral dilemmas or world-altering physics involved, just epic stories. So go ahead, make history, or at least help me make a few more videos.